Netflix's first German-language original series, Dark, is perhaps the most efficient TV show I've ever seen. It's kind of impressive just how much plot is packed into only 26 episodes. The show wastes very little time with side stories and red herrings, and even the smallest details have lasting consequences. It's a bit like a giant cosmic chess game, where every move matters and every piece has their role to play. I don't want to get too deep into the story because it's best watched without any pretext, but I think it's worth mentioning that Dark is a time travel story. It's extremely complex, almost mind-bending at times, but never so much so that it leaves you completely lost. The show's plot has clearly been meticulously planned from the start. All of the various clues and every single one of the show's 72 named characters are connected in one way or another, and they're all essential to the story. This level of control over even the smallest details creates a cohesiveness that's somewhat unusual for television. Where a traditional cable TV show is limited by studio influence and the constant threat of cancellation, Dark's 3 seasons feel more like a film trilogy. With this also comes unusually consistent and interesting cinematography. In today's oversaturated TV landscape, there are still so many shows that fail to stand out visually, but Dark works from the beginning to build its own look. The muted color palette is contrasted by bold shot compositions and artful lighting, and layered over these visuals is the striking pitch bends of the show's score, courtesy of Australian composer Ben Frost. This score, in tandem with the show's visuals, makes for a consistent, recognizable stylization that's maintained throughout the production. All of this, paired with the show's mind-bending narrative, creates a tone and feel that's unlike anything else on television. A show that feels entirely unique and original. Except it's not really original, is it? What a good artist understands is that nothing comes from nowhere. All creative work builds on what came before it. Nothing is completely original. This quote is from Austin Kleon, author of New York Times bestselling Steal Like an Artist. In it, he says that you are a mashup, and that anyone can be creative if they surround themselves with the right influences. Or, as filmmaker Kirby Ferguson puts it, everything is a remix. Aside from the unique tone and feel, one of the aspects of Dark that most stood out to me is just how much of other media is present in it, and just how much the show wears its influences on its sleeve. As far as Dark's visual style, showrunners Baron Bo-Odar and Jante Fries cite the work of American photographer Gregory Crewdson. Crewdson is known for working more like a filmmaker than a photographer, utilizing storyboards and scripts, elaborately staged sets, and often working with a crew of over a dozen, including a director of photography and a lighting crew. Crewdson's images frequently take place in small-town America and often depict surreal scenes and disturbing events. The carefully constructed lighting gives these photos a heightened sense of theatricality, and the subjects featured in them appear to be frozen in time, as though they're in a stage play that's put on pause. This look serves as the inspiration for scenes like this one, in which characters wordlessly move around the frame as though they're on stage. Dark showrunner and director Baron Bo-Odar says that Crewdson's images served as inspiration for the show's look because they contain that creepy feeling of suburbia. Everything seems normal until you notice there's something really weird going on beneath the surface. While many of Crewdson's photos contain settings with small-town familiarity, they're also distinctly void of any landmarks or signifiers of any specific period or era, and thus they create a world outside of time. As far as narrative, Dark pulls much of its plot ideas from the 2 franchises that it references directly in universe, Back to the Future and The Matrix. These franchises are classics in their respective genres, time travel films and false reality films, and these 2 genres are what is mixed together to form the backbone of the story told in Dark. There's also a frequent comparison that's made between Dark and its fellow Netflix original Stranger Things. Both shows share a fairly similar premise. A child goes missing in a small woodland town with a mysterious plant, and a police investigation uncovers elements of the supernatural. However, it's worth mentioning that Dark and Stranger Things were in production around the same time, so they couldn't have possibly had any influence on each other, right? This introduces an interesting idea. It's not that these shows had any impact on each other, but that both are products of the same influences. Both the Duffer Brothers and the couple behind the creation of Dark grew up in the 1980s, an era that is heavily featured in both shows. Both sets of showrunners cite Stephen King's novels and Steven Spielberg's films as major influences on their work in the shows and their respective projects, but in different ways. While Stranger Things leans more toward a Spielberg movie with elements of the family-friendly adventure story that pulls a page out of The Goonies or E.T., Dark leans more in the direction of a Stephen King novel, embracing a more mature, unsettling tone with more horror elements to it. Besides the work of King and Spielberg, another work that serves as an important predecessor to both Stranger Things and Dark is David Lynch's Twin Peaks. Twin Peaks follows the lives of a variety of interconnected characters living in a small woodland town and a police investigation that reveals a more supernatural side of things. Sounds familiar, right? It's difficult to really describe the impact that Twin Peaks has had on modern-day television. Without Twin Peaks, there's not just no Stranger Things or no Dark, there's no X-Files, no Sopranos, and no Lost. There's a certain duality to everything in Dark. Life and death, dream and nightmare, light and shadow, and I'm almost certain that this idea was pulled directly from Twin Peaks. The Black Lodge and the White Lodge, Laura Palmer's good and bad deeds, the two Coopers. Duality and balance is a theme that's present throughout Twin Peaks. And this idea of an inner darkness is another concept that's explored in Dark as well. In Dark, we often see characters who are pushed to their limits by their circumstances, doing terrible things for what they think is the greater good. And you can see this as a reflection of the internal darkness that's witnessed in Twin Peaks, in characters like Leland and Ben and even Laura. Both stories are comprised of characters who, on the surface, are normal, upstanding citizens, but have terrible secrets hidden beneath the surface, and likewise, both Twin Peaks and Dark begin as standard crime dramas, but evolve into something more supernatural. While Twin Peaks' supernatural elements were intended to be part of an ongoing mystery that was never to be solved, Dark takes an opposite approach, having the entire plot and ending fleshed out before shooting even began. To bring all of this full circle, the surreal and supernatural feel of Gregory Crewdson's photographs is also said to have been inspired in part by none other than David Lynch. I think this is a really interesting way to view any creative work, by looking at it through the lens of what came before it. Art is not made in a vacuum, and looking through this lens of influences allows us to see a work for more than just what it is. It gives context to the creative decisions that were made along the way, and helps us to see not just where things came from, but why they are the way that they are. But what's also fun about this idea of influence is that it goes both ways. Dark is a fairly new show, its final season having premiered less than a year ago, but I wouldn't be surprised if in a few years we start hearing that other creatives are citing it as an influence on their own work. In fact, I think this is practically inevitable given the nature of art and influence. It's hard to say what type of long-term impact Dark will have on TV and film without a briefcase time machine of my own, but if one thing is for sure, it's that all creative work builds on what came before it, and nothing is truly original.